Welcome back to Triathlon Training Explained, powered by Training Peaks. This week, we're going to be getting a little bit geeky and looking at the numbers that you aren't currently using, but really should be. Stats and numbers can be pretty useful for a personal analysis. I say they're essential for a coach, and they're also quite interesting if you just follow the sport. Now, I'm going to presume you're aware of the common measurements such as pace, heart rate, power, speed, etc. Those sort of things that you're likely to have displayed on your sports watch or your bike computer. Well, today I'm going to be delving deeper into the world of stats and numbers to help you to be able to improve your analysis and therefore performance. This is actually relevant to both cycling and running, and it's a number that you can react to pretty much instantaneously. Finding the optimum cadence for a long or a hard effort, or even more importantly a race, can significantly improve your efficiency. So for running, it's measured in strides per minute. If you're on the bike, it's revolutions per minute. You can also then analyse your overall average cadence at the end of an effort. If you don't want to get bombarded with too many numbers, then consider using zones to train with. So a simple scale of 1 to 5 or 1 to 7 for power or heart rate just makes it a lot easier. And you can even set your device to alert you if you fall outside of that zone or prescribed zones for your session. And then you don't need to worry about looking at the smaller numbers and constantly checking. You can just concentrate on your effort, knowing you're working at the right intensity. I'm sure you're aware of hills when you meet them, and especially uphills, although frustratingly going downhill isn't always as advantageous as you might hope. If you're riding with a power meter though, it doesn't really matter because you're just concentrating on those numbers. If you don't have that metric, you will be looking at the speed that you're going at, and you'll need to take into consideration the gradient that you're riding on. Well, it's usually displayed in a percentage. And it's quite useful when you analyse your ride afterwards, as well as you can work out your effort level to a certain extent by taking into consideration whether it was up or downhill or on the flat. This can be displayed on most bike computers or advanced sports watches even, but of course you do have to have a power meter or power pedals in the first place. But the great thing about power, it gives you instant feedback on any changes in effort, and it's really easy to make sure you're working at the right intensity. But normalised power takes it to the next level, as it takes into consideration any changes in gradient, if you're going up or downhill a lot, or if you're having to stop and start, say, through traffic lights. And it usually comes out as a number higher than your average power. So it just gives you a slightly more accurate idea of just what intensity you've been working at. Leading on from normalised power, this works out how smoothly you've ridden your bike. Variability index and all of these following numbers are useful for analysing your data post-effort. So this one is a simple calculation of normalised power divided by your average power. And a score of 1 is optimal, but unlikely. So for a non-drafting triathlon or time trial, you should aim to be between 1 and 1.05. If you're close to 1.1, that indicates poor pacing and inefficient riding. This is similar in some ways to normalised power. It's looking at pace in direct relation to the changes in gradient. So imagine if you were running up a hill at the same effort level as you ran on the flat, you'd expect that pace to be slower. So your watch through GPS obviously knows if you're going up or down a hill, and it can work out the pace at which you're running at. Now, if you've done, say, a hard effort on a hilly route, you might feel a little disheartened at your average pace, but normalised graded power would actually work out what that pace would be if you were running on the flat. Using your normalised graded pace, you can actually work out your intensity factor. And this number is really useful in determining how hard you've worked in that training session, the training benefit, and importantly, the recovery that you'll then require. Now, if you use a Training Peaks platform, that automatically calculates it for you after each session. But you can also do it yourself by using your normalised graded pace, or if you're cycling, your normalised power, and then dividing that by your functional threshold pace or functional threshold power, and that will give you your intensity factor. Therefore, if intensity factor equals 1, it means you've ridden or ran at your FTP for that given period. So it's likely to be higher in a race of less than an hour or an intense training session, but then on a longer event, you'll see a number that's going to be less than 1. As an Ironman age group athlete, you'd expect to see an intensity factor of around 0.6 to 0.7 in a race, whereas the pros and elites are going to be between 0.7 and 0.79. That sort of intensity is the same for an age grouper doing a half Ironman distance. However, according to Training Peaks predictions, they'd say that for an Olympic or a sprint distance triathlon, you're more likely to expect something between 0.9 to 1.04. For these next few numbers, I think I need a little bit of help from my laptop because we're going to be delving deeper into some more analytics. Well, this is another metric used by Training Peaks, and it's a great marker for your overall fitness, especially just at a glance if you're using the graph, for example. So an increase in your training stress score indicates that your training load, so your intensity or your volume or both, has increased, and therefore your overall fitness in the long term will also be improving. It is a slightly more complicated calculation on first glance, but it's basically adding together your normalized power, your intensity factor, and the length of your training session, and then dividing all of that by your FTP. There is a more straightforward calculation which you can do, which looks like this. So intensity factor squared times by the amount of hours times by 100, and that will also equal your TSS. Training Peaks actually has some guidelines for training using the TSS values to give you an idea of how hard and for how long you need to be training, depending obviously on your individual target. Now, these are just a rough guide, but a great starting point if you are new to using these numbers. Leading on from TSS, there are some other useful numbers that will contribute to your daily fitness chart. And obviously we've talked about fitness being key, but you must consider fatigue alongside that, as then combined together, they will give you your overall form. This is a measure of the long-term effect of your training load, and it actually takes into consideration the last 42 days and uses an average, but it does put a bigger weight on the more recent days, as obviously they're going to have more of an impact on where you are right now. This one goes hand in hand with CTL, as it's a measure of your overall fatigue. So it takes into account your TSS, your training stress score from the last 7 days, but again puts more weight on the final few days, as they're going to have more of an impact. This one is the important combination of your chronic training load and your acute training load. And together you can then work out your training stress balance, which is also known as form, that all important number that you're looking at ahead of a race that's coming up. So to calculate these, you take yesterday's chronic training load and you subtract yesterday's acute training load to get your TSB score. And hopefully you're going to have a positive number, that's good. And the higher the number, the better, especially if you're looking for a strong performance. And interestingly, after a big race, if you've had some rest, you'll notice that your TSB gets a second peak, and this is because your fatigue is dramatically decreasing, but you haven't really increased your training, so your form is dropping off ever so slightly, but the amount of rest will actually give you that second peak, and this is where you'll see some athletes able to perform quite successfully again after a big race 2 or 3 weeks later. And it actually becomes much clearer if you take a look at the Training Peaks performance management chart. You can see the peak from my A race this year, and then a sub-peak a couple of weeks after when I'd recovered, but before my fitness had really dropped off. You can also look at your predicted form to give you an idea of where you're going to be in the next week or two. And this is a really useful tool for your coach, so he can tailor your training exactly to make sure you peak for that A race. Let's take a step back and look at a slightly lighter element of training, yet still an equally important number, and that is sleep. Now, you can track your sleep on most fitness watches or even using an app on your phone, and it's a good idea to record this data over a period of time so you can start to see any patterns, work out how much sleep you need and the quality of that sleep. Now, with the Polar products, there's an app called Polar Flow, and that'll actually tell you the quality of sleep you've had on a scale out of 5. And then also, as well as recording the amount of time you've spent in bed, it'll give you a percentage of that was spent asleep. And all of these stats are really helpful when you're analysing your training, as if you've had a few days of not such continuous sleep or reduced amount of sleep, then it could have a knock-on effect on your training, and it's worth taking that into consideration when you're planning your next few days as well. It's pretty common these days to hear people talking about how many steps they've done in a day, with 10,000 being that ultimate goal. And that's great if you're someone who's not naturally that active. But if you're a triathlete and you're training for swim, bike and run, then really you want to actually try and reduce the extra steps that you're doing and reduce that active time so you can optimize your recovery. Now, another similar figure are calories. It is pretty satisfying after a big training day to look at how many calories you've burned, but really just glance at it and concentrate on getting the fuel back in, so making sure you've got the right proportions of protein, carbohydrate, fats, and of course fiber, minerals and vitamins to make sure your body can really recover. There are, of course, plenty of other numbers out there, so focus on the ones that are going to help you and your coach work towards your goal. And remember, you still do need to listen to your body as well. Well, if you've enjoyed it, give us the thumbs up, like, and hit the globe to subscribe to make sure you get all of our videos here at GTN. And if you want to see some other videos from our Triathlon Training Explained series, you can find those just over here.